So now I would like to introduce Sue Hansen and Layla Ananda. Correct me, Layla, if I pronounced your name wrong. They're going to be our presenters today on implicit bias. Just for introduction, Sue is a psychotherapist who works in Ann Arbor with an emphasis on treating the whole person living in society. She has offered training in conflict resolution, bystander intervention training, talking with people whom you disagree, implicit bias, and violence de-escalation through co-liberation facilitators, Meta Peace Team, and Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. She is currently working on developing programs for disrupting white supremacy culture, as well as developing a kit for self-care in this difficult and changing world. Layla is also a psychologist, educator, and musician from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Her current work is focused on bringing increased awareness and action around racism and many other aspects of diversity. She offers presentations on talking to people you disagree with, implicit bias, bystander intervention, and other topics through deep peace consulting and co-liberation facilitators. She also leads workshops and classes through Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice and the Threshold Choir International. So welcome, Sue and Layla, and thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'll turn it over to you. Oh, I did want to say I'll be monitoring chat, so if you have questions, you can send them in chat, or you can also raise your hand or just speak up. So Layla and Sue, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with you today and to see a lot of familiar faces. Sue, why don't you say hi, and then we're going to go straight into a song to get us started.
Hi, I'm Sue, and I'm so glad to meet all of you from Dispute Resolution Center. I have so much gratitude for all of the work that you're doing.
Okay, so let's get underway. One thing I would ask is if you would please mute yourselves if you are not sharing. We will have chance for people to talk a couple of places here, but let's mute otherwise, please. And here is our song to start out.
We have this.
Whoa. There we go.
Don't leave a sister hanging. You gotta put one foot on the other and lead with love. One foot on the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot on the other and lead with love. One foot on the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. You give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes. You despair. Don't you despair. Up ahead. Look up ahead. The path is there. The path is there. You gotta put one foot in front of the other. One foot in front of the other. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other. One foot in front of the other. One foot in front of the other. One foot and lead with love. I know you're scared.
So I want to bring you all into the room. In these days of Zoom, we're often kind of distracted For me, there's a little cat that runs around here. There's the thought that possibly I need to take care of this other thing before we do something. And so I would like to bring us in to center. So first of all, lean forward into that energy that's striving to get here and to get things done. And lean back into that collapse that we often have from all of that strain. And then bring yourself to a neutral position between those two, with your back straight, your head being drawn upward. And then feel your feet on the floor. Feel the energy coming up through your feet. Notice the chair that is holding you. Now move into your breathing. Notice the breath that comes in and out without any effort. Notice the movement of the air around you on your skin. Any noises in the room, let them just go and be present now.
We're so glad that you're here today to learn from us and along with us, because we never stop learning. And there we are. So our topic today, as you know, is implicit bias. It's a big topic. We could spend hours talking about it, but we will spend somewhere in the neighborhood of an hour today. And we are very glad to have you here with us. We are going to start this next piece with a land acknowledgement, and I want to speak it out loud as well as have you see it on the screen. Ann Arbor is on land originally inhabited by the Ottawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and Wyandot people. We acknowledge that we continue to benefit from access to land originally gained through the exploitation of Indigenous people, and we're aware of the care these people gave and continue to give to this land. Knowing these things cannot change the harm done, but a thorough understanding can empower us to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals. Learning all we can of Native American historic and present situations is something we can start with. And we give thanks to Chelsea One World One Family for giving us permission to use this land acknowledgement. Unmute, Sue, please.
How often do I hear that? So in the short time, I'm just going to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about. We will talk about what is implicit bias. Some of us have a great deal of knowledge on this, and some of us it's a kind of a new concept. So we will bring in examples. We will help you to explore a little and give you some ideas of how to explore what implicit bias you may have. We'll talk about the effect on people around us and on ourselves, and the possible harm that can come out of this, and what can we actually do about it, and how to prevent and repair harm when we have harmed someone. We will also, because this is not something we're going to be able to deal with just today, and it's actually a lifelong process, we'll talk about how to deepen and continue the work. So one of the things is that in order to enter into this work, we have to open our hearts. We have to move into curiosity. We have to move away from shame and guilt, which often gets in our way. Another important thing for today is, and for the ongoing work, is to start noticing how things land in your body. That can often be a big clue as to what is going on. Being also aware of opinions, judgments, and feelings is pretty important. And holding them without a lot of judgment, but with a desire to free ourselves of them. And also, we hope that you'll be looking at some plans of action. We'll talk about that a little bit today too.
So we want to start out with some definitions here. What is implicit bias? And also want to say, to start out, we will be giving you a copy of these slides, so you don't have to worry about writing down what you see here. We'll give you a link at the end of the presentation. The biggest thing that I want to say about implicit bias is that it has to do with awareness. It has to do with being able to look at ourselves and know that things come up from our unconscious, that it happens to everyone, that they arise whether we want them to or think they are part of who we are or not. A quote from an article I read said, "To make it even more confounding, a person's implicit biases are often in conflict with their own beliefs about how they see the world." So we have all been in the world since we were children. We have been hearing things from so many different sources, from our parents, from our peers, from our teachers, from the media that's all around us. We swim in a global sea of many things, one of which, or 1,000 of which, are bias. There's some idea that this comes from a protective mechanism, that things that seem different to us seem threatening, and that maybe that comes from long ago when, we had to be scared of animals and things that could harm us. But regardless of whether that is the case or not, we have ideas and attitudes that just arise, and they can come in a flash. And I will give you a couple of quick examples, and I will say I'm going to start out right now being a little bit uncomfortable, and I want to encourage all of you to be able to allow yourself to be a little uncomfortable, and so that you can look at yourselves honestly. So one thing I remember is when I started out life with my parents, and we would drive through certain neighborhoods, and this was long before self-locking car doors. They would look around and say, "Lock your doors, lock your car doors." And those were neighborhoods, primarily, I would say, where people of color lived. And that makes me so sad to say that, and yet I carry some of that fear, some of that "is everything all right" with me as an adult, and it just comes up when I least expect it. One other quick one is I had an aunt who constantly looked at people. In fact, before she even said hello, she would say, "Oh, it looks like you've lost a few pounds," or she would look at you pointedly. And my life has been full of diets and judgments about myself and my weight. But of course, that spills out into other people too. And those kinds of judgments sometimes come up quick as a flash when I look at somebody. And I wish they didn't, but they do. We all have it.
So who has implicit bias? Can everybody who has implicit bias raise your hand? Actually, I'm going to tell you, everyone has implicit bias. As Layla said, some of this is like a survival skill to be able to sort where we sort things out. But there have also been influences that in our lives that have not been so innocent or helpful. White supremacist culture has really put messages in. Often this thing of othering, which is part of survival, has also been taken advantage of by people who would gain from that. So, but anyway, you figure we have got messages, and they're coming from they come from people around us. They come from TV shows. They commentary on the news. They're very subtle. Often they're very subtle. These are not the necessarily those things that we would blatantly go, that is racist. It's a different type of thing that shows up because, of course, we're going, I'm not. Those people, not me. But it's not about good people or bad people. Our brains hide things from us. But it is our responsibility to bring those forward so that they're not hidden and they're not affecting other people.
Gail, I see you have a hand up. Did you want to say something? Ask something? You're muted. You're muted. Uh-oh. Hang on. I'm going to stop the share and see if we figure, do we have a problem? Allow participants to unmute. Gail, I can't hear you.
It's still muted.
No, I was just saying I have an implicit bias.
Oh, okay, you're raising your hand.
I was just
Great.
reacting.
Thank you,
I was
thank you,
raising
thank
my
you.
hand, but no.
All right, I appreciate knowing what
Yeah.
that was. That's great, thank you. All right, let's get back to our, there we are. Okay, so how do you recognize implicit bias? So we're going to be asking you a couple of different times here to think about different things and how you react to them. So any of these topics that you see here could be the source of an implicit bias. I gave a talk recently where I owned up to having anxiety and depression at various times in my life. And then I even owned up to having issues around childhood trauma. But then I said, and it's still true, if I say I have a mental illness, oh, that's hard for me. And if I see somebody else that I think of as having a mental illness, I have a tweak. I'm a psychologist, and I still have a tweak of something critical that comes up for me. Now, I just ask you to look at these and just think of, are there things that tweak you? If you see a certain kind of clothing, if you see a parent acting in a particular way in a grocery store, if you see somebody of an ethnicity that's different than yours, just think to yourself. So this is the beginning of that awareness that I talked about that is so important and crucial to, because if we don't know about our implicit biases, we can't do anything about them. If we think, oh, I don't have those, or if we just can't admit them, then we have a really hard time being able to work with them and not act out of them. And that's where it gets difficult. And I want to just read you a couple of things that come from an article that was published by the American College of Cardiology. And this is where we go from thinking and having those split-second thoughts to actions based on implicit bias. So here's a quote that says, Black and Hispanic patients are significantly less likely than whites to receive pain medications, even for acute injuries like bone fractures. When they do receive analgesics, they are at lower doses than white patients, despite having higher pain scores. And this is based on research. Physicians are less likely to treat suicidal ideation in elderly patients, despite the fact that those 85 and older have the second highest rate of suicide of any group. Women are 3 times less likely to be referred for total knee replacement than men, even when clinically indicated, and are less likely to be diagnosed with COPD than men, despite having similar histories in medical examinations. Also, there is research that's showing that 40% of medical students believe that people of color have thicker skin than people whose skin is considered white. And last but not least, at the airport one day when my daughter was young and we had walked around and looked at a lot of things, she said to me, "How come all the pilots are men?" Lots and lots of things that happen because of our explicit biases or implicit biases. We don't really know for sure that 95% of our mind operates at an unconscious level, but a lot of it does. The number is high. And there's supposed to be another quote that's missing here, but I'm going to read it to you. "It is my work," says Rachel Ricketts, an author and activist, to unearth and address my own privileges so I can cause less harm to those whom I oppress.
So now we want to explore with you, what is your implicit bias? And we're going to do it in a very kind of quick way. I'm going to be saying a word, and I think you'll get a mental image of related to that word. If you can, jot it down. Then we'll talk about it a little bit more afterwards, okay? So picture a doctor. A person on welfare. Sure, dangerous neighborhood. What does that look like? Who lives there? About an emotional person. A strong, charismatic leader. Someone who's disorganized. Someone who is dirty and disheveled. What do they look like? A person asking for money. What do you think of when you think of a fat person? How about a homeless person? So some of these may be kind of new things that you haven't realized. It's interesting to me, the first time I ever did this, that when they mentioned a doctor, I said, in my mind, I got a male doctor, even though I actually have a female doctor who is a person of color. So that implicit bias can be there even when we have different facts. But what I'd like to do is, and we're going to need Gail's help here to kind of call on people, is I'd like you to just kind of, it may not be on these, but it may be on something else that you've noticed. Kind of be brave here and come up with what might have surprised you with what you came up with. Or if it wasn't within this, another particular thing that maybe surprised you as far as your own implicit bias.
I guess I would ask the group, does anybody want to volunteer to share?
Yeah, how do you want them to let you know?
I would say just unmute and.
Well, I could confess something that sort of surprised me. Men showed up in every single one of these categories. I have no idea why. And like Sue, I have a female doctor and have had one for years, and yet the picture is still this man in a white coat with glasses or whatever. So that sort of surprises me.
How about anybody else?
Yeah, it's like this morning I was shopping at Kroger's and I saw a couple who were quite overweight, one in a cart, and they weren't wearing masks. And so I felt really angry. I felt angry at them because I felt they were taking resources. And I also formed all sorts of other implicit opinions about their politics, their character, and all sorts of other things. And that troubled me in a few ways. One, I have, it's an explicit bias. I mean, I don't like it when I see people in stores not wearing masks. But it also really concerns me that maybe a third of the population is going around thinking I'm crazy. And I mean, it concerns me, what are we coming to where you have such strong feelings in everyday situations like that?
So thank you very much for sharing that. One of the things that you also said in there that I think is true is that often our implicit biases can lead us to more explicit biases. And in that particular case, it probably did not affect those people at all. It did not cause them harm that you had this bias. And I think of another one. Yeah.
I mean, it could cause them a lot of harm because I'm really wondering, I mean, in terms of policy, what should we be doing in emergency rooms in terms of triaging and things like that? So, and then, I mean,
I'm sorry, I guess let me clarify that a little bit. Your bias and the ideas that you came up with about them did not cause them any harm in this setting. It's like I had an experience in which I was at a hardware store, and it was a Saturday, and you know, on Saturdays are project days, and I made the assumption when I would see like a white man who was in grubby clothes that he was working on a project. But I noticed that when I was looking at a black man who was in grubby clothes, that I was making an assumption that they were poor, that they, you know, a lot of other little assumptions in there. Now that didn't end up harming them because, you know, I didn't even have an interaction and it didn't come out. But there's other ways in which, you know, it does harm people. I mean, even the thing that you were just, Holly was saying, as far as making, there's some assumptions that we make about people and what they've gone through or where their station is in life, based upon a lot of different things. Does anybody else have something they want to offer?
Tommy has his hand up, so please go ahead.
Oh, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm always concerned about, at least in terms of race and racism, how implicit bias impacts white folk and how it impacts me in turn. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about some of the words that were used, for instance, was neighborhood one or mm-hmm. Like, I don't think about black and brown neighborhoods. I think about Ahmaud Arbery. When I walk around neighborhoods in Ann Arbor, I'm always a little uncomfortable because my thinking is that someone's looking out of the window, depending on how I'm dressed. If I'm dressed in a hoodie, which I love to wear, someone's going to call because they haven't seen me around their neighborhood. So, yeah, I'm always concerned about, just to repeat, I'm always concerned about how implicit bias impacts me negatively in terms of the biases that white people hold, particularly when you start talking about how that mixes with institutions like law enforcement or the courts or schools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for opening up what is a dangerous neighborhood. As far as when I picture a dangerous neighborhood and what you picture a dangerous neighborhood, it may be very, very different. So I'd like to invite anyone else, unless somebody has their hand up right now.
Yeah. Several here.
Okay.
Audrey?
Let me, excuse me. Just
sorry.
So anybody can add anything into the chat because we're going to need to move on after Audrey. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. When you talk about implicit bias and the harm that can come from implicit bias, I happen to be thinking of my childhood. I'm African American. I grew up in Detroit City, and I grew up in an area that, of course, was concentrated with African Americans. As a child, you know, that was home. That was my home, and I felt safe there. Hey, Kwame, where implicit bias was very strong in my life was in institutions, in schools. When I ventured out of my community, my home, my setting where I felt comfortable, implicit bias was very strong, and particularly in the school setting. It was very obvious to me that I was different, and it was made known that I was different. And those implicit biases came out very strong. therefore, from institutions of school, employment, implicit biases was very strong. And for me, I think it's important. Yes, I have implicit bias too. But it's important for us to address our implicit biases. I don't think it's something that's practiced, you know, when we're in situations or circumstances occur. I don't think it's practiced that, do I have an implicit bias here? And how am I going to respond in this situation? How am I going to address this? But implicit bias is very strong. Implicit bias hurts, and it can be damaging.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate that. I also want to say that that Harvard study, we're going to be linking that in at the end of the the slides, and also in the chat. And I would suggest that people do take the little tests to kind of get an idea. You also brought up that we may have biases that that are also related to ourselves. In that test, that's been going on for, I don't know, 19 something, long time. For example, they found that more than 80% of the people who completed the IAT, which is the name of that test, related to age bias, exhibited a negative impact bias against the elderly. And I am going to guess that there were elderly people in there who also had that bias. So it just is there a great deal. So let's see. We are.
So I'm gonna get the share back up here. We're gonna talk about some of what you have been bringing up, which is just so important and crucial. And I did see that there were a couple of people, Patricia and Belinda, who have their hands up, and I do want to make some time we're going to have some time at the end, I hope, to hear some more from people. So I would like to hear from everybody we can. But we want to talk a little bit about some of what you've been saying and what we've been saying, which is that while in the moment that one has an implicit bias arise out of in mind, it may not have an immediate impact, but it does have a larger cultural and societal impact on everyone, but on people who are discriminated against in society even more. It keeps us away from each other to start with. It makes us think negative things of each other. I read you some of the statistics about how medical care is given out differently, and medical care that's not even given at all as a result of our implicit biases that get played out in our society at large and in our social systems. And as Kwame stated so clearly, what seems like a dangerous neighborhood is really different depending on who you are. And those hair trigger kinds of things that come up where somebody says, I don't feel safe, lead people. We've all seen it for ourselves on the media, lead people to get killed. And we teach things to our children, and not sometimes not because we mean to, because they just come out. We miss out on so many relationships. We miss out on having a kind and generous society. We miss out on feeling good about ourselves if we're not willing to bring forward those implicit biases. Look at them, think about them, find out how we can shift them so that they are not primary motivators in our lives. We have a couple of things we're going to just kind of gloss over pretty quickly here because we're running out of time. But they're big topics, and we hope that you will go back if they're new to you and look through some of the resources. And if not, just think about how implicit bias comes out as microaggressions.
Yeah, so I don't know how familiar you are with microaggressions. I really don't like the name because it makes it sound like it's very, very tiny. And in some ways it is. It's little verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights. And it comes out of our implicit bias, our stereotypes. And it's often very automatic. It's not intentional. But it communicates that you are the other. It can be hostile, it can be derogatory, it can bring a negative viewpoint. We have a lovely little videotape here called How Microaggressions Are Like Mosquito Bites, and I hope that you would watch it. It's just a little animated thing. I think it's pretty terrific because some of the things that come up in these things is microaggressions, like people asking, "Oh, what country do you come from?" And the person responding, "The United States," because of these assumptions, we're othering. Okay, so you get one of those during a day. You get one of those during a week or a month. It's not a big deal. You can usually kind of clear it up, let it go. But microaggressions are like mosquito bites. One, you can deal with, many over and over again, it starts to really drive you crazy. With good cause, So I want to now pass it on to you, Layla, so that we can get onto some ways of dealing with this.
So we also we're planning to do something a little bit longer on white supremacy culture than we're going to do right now, just because we are clearly running out of time. But I think we have to at least touch on this. If you could imagine a culture that's kind and loving and gives help to everyone who needs it and finds value in everyone, works together as a community. Some of you may be in cultures in your lives that actually operate in that way. But when you look at our larger systems of culture in the US, what you see is a culture that's harsh, punitive, individualistic, expecting people to fend for themselves. We make it harder for certain people to find jobs, to have a place to live, to have reliable transportation or childcare or medical care. And then we put people down for not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. And then if they have a hard time in that culture, then we incarcerate them, and we incarcerate at higher rates than any other country. and we incarcerate Black people 5 times more than we incarcerate white people. These are the larger social systems from which our implicit biases come. If this idea of white supremacy culture is new to you, I encourage you. There's a new website by Tema Okun that has wonderful information on it. We don't get away from this. It is a part of what anybody who lives in the culture of the United States and other countries as well has to confront this, either from a position of privilege or from a position of lack of privilege. And it is a part of what, as they say, the sea we swim in, the undertow, the undercurrents that bring our implicit biases forward.
So this whole piece here is of white supremacy also states what is normal. It's like this is normal, and everything else is not. And that's a particular pet peeve of mine, and something I'm working on a great deal. So there are, again, we're going to at the bottom of this. Oh, it isn't on this slide. It will be in the bottom of the thing. There are many approaches that have been scientifically studied, and I'm not going to go into each of those. Mindfulness meditation techniques are helpful. There are counter stereotypic trainings that can help to break those things. Of course, education, keeping ourselves educated, learning the truth. But how would we know some of these things? Some of it's if we can be around other people, which right now is a little bit more challenging to end up being physically around people and overhearing conversations and seeing people. But I want to talk more about what we can do personally. So when we notice, and sometimes you can notice it, that you have kind of something that doesn't sound quite right to you. Pay attention to it, to find out where, is that true? Like, I spend an awful lot of my time really questioning myself. It's being self-reflective. Questioning is, noticing the assumption that I have. So am I noticing that I'm assuming this person is a particular way? That can be in a lot of different settings. And what I'm finding is that most of the time I'm really off. So I let that come in. And I go, okay, what else might be true? I'm assuming this about this person. We've got various things that will show up. One thing about Northerners is we hear a Southern accent. Not all of us, but often we hear a Southern accent. We've got all sorts of ideas about that and the intelligence of a person using that accent. So there are things like that you can become aware of, that you have a tendency towards that. And you can bring that to the situation, and you can go, okay, I know that I tend to think that people with Southern accents because I was raised around here, and there's a lot of crazy little comics about it, and that I may undervalue somebody with that accent. So I'm going to pay particular attention. So listening and thinking deeply about any feedback that we do get from other people. And some of that feedback will be verbal. Some people will verbalize to us. But also noticing if somebody kind of makes a face. Am I doing something? Am I coming across with a microaggression? And then I can check that out. Maybe not with that person, because that again can be another microaggression. But maybe maybe it's checking it out and with a friend who can help me to sort it out. I saw that I made so and so really uncomfortable. Can you help me with what that might have been about? And that's part of how we help each other. So we're not going to. There's a quote here from Banaji. I would say we should not be naive about how easily we can change them, the biases. On the other hand, there are studies that demonstrate that you can at least produce shifts. And it is our responsibility to do that.
So the big message that I would like to leave you with today is to find ways to be more aware of your own biases when they arise. Don't run away. Accept that you have them. Has nothing to do about whether you are a good person or not, or do good work in the world. We all have them. Accept that we can not act just because we have specific thoughts or feelings. We can shift those. We can learn to repair when harm is done. We can broaden our circles of people so that when we actually are meeting and interacting with people, we have entirely different ideas, or can have entirely different ideas about people than we have been taught. So awareness and self-care makes a difference in how well we're able to be aware and how well we're able to stop ourselves from acting in ways that might harm other people.
So we're all going to oops, and hopefully it's only a small oops and it doesn't cause anybody a lot of trouble. We may get called out. If we're lucky, we'll get called in. But I think we're lucky either way if somebody is willing to share with us when our biases have come into play. So one thing to know is what not to do. Don't make it about you. If somebody is willing to share this with you, that or you catch yourself, don't make it about you. Don't explain. Don't talk about your intentions. Instead, look for clues as to what did I just do. Take responsibility straightforward. Repair the harm. So apologize. Ask if there is anything that you can do to help the person who you've harmed. The other really important thing is to do regular debriefs. And I know that you do debriefs after you've had one of your sessions with the other people who have been there. Make implicit bias a piece of that. Also, find other people that you can check in with. I've got friends who I know who are also on this path, who I can check with and find out what they will find out where I may have gone wrong, and they will also call me in on it. They will let me know how I've messed up, and I'm really grateful to them. I know that we're really low on time here. We were hoping to have you be able to share more comments, but go ahead.
I hope, well, if people can stay, anybody who can stay for a few minutes, we would really very much appreciate more conversation if there is, if there are people. But I do want to end with this quote and to say, this is not something you will leave here feeling all wrapped up or comfortable about. And I even am looking at the presentation we made and thinking about how it can be improved and bring in more about society and its ills. But it's our responsibility to look at the ways in which our own isms, our own phobias are not only harming us and maybe harming the people that we interact with, but harming our society as a whole. Implicit bias is a part of what we need to understand in order to be able to fix the social inequities that are all around us. And I see there are many, many chat comments. I don't know what they are because I haven't been able to see them, but we're back here and I would really like to hear from anybody who has time to stay and would be willing to comment. I know Patricia and Belinda both had hands up earlier. I don't know if either one of you want to speak or anybody else.
Is Patricia still here? I'm looking on my screen. I don't.
Yes.
Yes,
I was certainly concede to her. Go ahead, Patricia.
Okay. No, I was just saying I'm so thankful for this topic on today because it allowed me to do self-inventory and to admit that I am biased about quite a few things. And it made me think about a couple of months ago, I would honestly say I was biased and the people in the group was biased. But sometimes if we don't know a person's story, for example, using me personally, trauma that I suffered as a little girl, and that trauma was being bullied and sexually molested by family members. So I remembered being in Bible study, and a few of the people made some remarks and they laughed about it. And at first, you know, I laughed about it, but then anger built up in me. And it brought back the flashbacks of being bullied. And for me, that was a trigger, but they didn't know it was a trigger for me. And, you know, I kept pretending like everything was okay. But then as things went on the inside, my gut feeling told me you have to let them know what's going on with you, you know. And so I opened up and I shared with them that the fact, I say, I know you all, you know, didn't do it intentionally. I said, but I need to let you all know what you said, it really angered me. I said, and it set off a trigger in me that you are unaware of what happened to me. And two of the people that was in the Bible study, one was my son and one was my daughter-in-law. And it was, I look back on it now, it was kind of funny because my son was like, oh my God, Mom, I didn't know you went through that, you know, as far as being bullied. And I have talked to my kids about being sexually abused as a child, but as far as being bullied, my kids didn't know that about my past. And everybody did apologize. But like I say, sometimes when we don't know people, and a lot of times we get the wrong impression of people and wonder why they react the way they do. If you don't know what that person done been through, for me, that is being biased. So it might be things that person may react in a certain way or say a certain way or do this or do that. But like right now, even because I do motivational speaking about what I did, what happened to me. And so I always tell people, learn a person first, learn a background, you know, get to know a person. And that's what's then helped me along the way. But I still have to do self-inventory and look in the mirror at myself and say, okay, are you like this? Because I do. I have things pop up in my head, you know, and I be feeling this type of way. Like even in the store, I see a kid cutting up, you know, I want to pop them and say, don't be doing that. But then I see the mom just letting them go through the grocery store screaming and hollering, or wait till I get you home. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You know, so yeah, I'm very thankful for this. It helped me a whole lot.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. And it's so valuable and courageous.
Yeah. Thank you.
I got to jump in and say, just remind people, this is being recorded. If you want anything you've said out loud to be removed from the final video, please let me know in chat or email me or let Gail know or something, okay? Thanks.
Did I go next?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to thank the DRC staff for always thinking of very thoughtful ways to use this space of our Lunch and Learn, formerly known as our brown bags. I think over the years, they're just always so rich in content. So I appreciate the work that you do to find speakers and all of that. It's not an easy task because they still are working on all of their casework and all the other stuff at the DRC as well. So I just want to publicly thank them for that. A few things came to mind, and I also want to thank the facilitators for bringing up such a delicate and difficult subject for those folks who are the recipients of these microaggressions. As a person, I'll speak for myself as a recipient of microaggressions. It is also very uncomfortable for me to talk about my own bias, but also to be thinking about the things that I have received that is rooted in bias in those microaggressions that I didn't even know that phrase until some, very later in life. And just understanding it helped put some things into context. I had the opportunity to hear Michelle Obama speak when her book came out, Becoming, and one of the things she said that sticks with me is that microaggressions are like thousands of little cuts that we experience. For those of us who receive those microaggressions, we do feel very wounded. And it hurts. And I just want to lift that up. It really hurts. I have learned, maybe because of that concept of thick skin, I've learned to let things slide off, bounce off of me. I've heard so many metaphors for that. Be like rubber and it'll bounce off of you. I think be like a frog and let it roll off your back or something like that. I've learned those things. They have become my coping mechanisms so that I can get up in the morning and come to work and perform my job. And I just want to be really real about that. It's not easy to live through these comments and oftentimes being said without the knowledge of the bias. In my personal experiences over the last almost 20 years here at the DRC, the question around the assumptions that people make about my ability, in terms of sometimes it was an age thing. I've been here for quite a while, and just in my work life, generally even before the DRC, sometimes it was an age thing. I must be too young to be able to do. It's an assumption about education. I am not smart enough to do. It's an assumption about socioeconomics. Can I afford to do? And those are also assumptions that people make that are very insulting. And my comment in the chat was that it can be generational. So because I have to deal with it, my son has to deal with it as he enters into the world. People make assumptions about him because he has a Black mama. We must be on welfare is the one that we hear most often. And I'm just sharing those as examples of how it can look and how that impact can be generational. I don't shake it off. I'm not a rubber band. It doesn't bounce off of me. And I just want to lift that up. And the last thing I want to say, going back to the work of the DRC, the restorative justice work, this conversation is extremely important, not because we're picking on or identifying any one person. We all have to be cognizant of this as we engage more and more. We are positioning ourselves or have positioned ourselves to engage with people who will be very different from us, who will have a very different life than we've had. The facilitators on the screen who work with children in foster care, families in the foster care system, we hear about circumstances and experiences of people that we have never had to think about before. And so understanding this bias and what triggers it and where it comes from, or if I'm doing it, and getting to know people, as Patricia said, you have to hear their story, getting to know them, to understand them as a human being. Our work is not so transactional anymore. It probably looked like that for a long time, but our work is really rooted in a person's humanity. And I just want to highlight that as we continue to grow and get stronger at the DRC, that, I appreciate so many people showing up for today. And I really want to encourage Gail and those who pulled this together, maybe have a part 2 of this at some point in time. It doesn't have to be in the next month or 2, but at some point in time, I think we have to keep the conversation going so that we can normalize it in some ways and get comfortable with our discomfort around this. Many people are doing it in different ways, and if you're involved with other kinds of settings, that's great. But I think the DRC's work warrants that we have these open conversations around this so that we can understand the impact of some of the things that we say or steps that we might take. No intent to do harm, but we do cause harm. And as a personal experience, I know that harm hurts, and it can hurt for a very long time. And I have shut down, I have distanced myself from folks, not because I don't like you, but I don't want to be hurt again. And all of that is going on. So I just wanted to share that from a personal perspective, but also as the director of the DRC, that this is an important thing to the work that we do, and I'd like to keep it going. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. And I wanted to read a comment from Audrey, because I hope that's okay, Audrey. It fits right in with what you have been saying. She says, mosquito bites resolve, microaggressions does not resolve, but has a ripple effect. She says, what can we do? Begin with the truth. And there's a couple of people who have thanked her for that comment and talked about how they don't get over, they don't go away, they just build until they become huge.
Joan, did you have a?
Well, I think those of us who might be causing harm and not be aware of it, and would like to become aware of it, speaking for myself, I don't know quite how to ask for feedback. I don't know whether that's appropriate, but I felt that maybe in this community I could raise the question.
Can I respond?
Yes, definitely.
When it comes to at least the circles and such, I love it if people say, this is what I would like feedback on. And so if you say, something like, I want feedback on anything, then I will, I'll include any biases that I notice in that feedback. But if you say specifically that you're looking for feedback on that, then I'll pay extra attention to that also. And it helps whoever your co-facilitator is also to pay attention to those things. I know one thing that is difficult for me in giving feedback is that, especially when it comes to pointing out people's biases, people usually shut down very quickly when you bring it up. And so it's, as we're making feedback and difficult feedback a more common occurrence, it gets easier. But I think that when folks aren't used to that being something that happens regularly, they shut down, and it actually becomes counterproductive to us having the conversation. So if you're open to that feedback, let me know, and I'm happy to make that be something that is more direct.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to mention that I put the link to the handout in the chat. So
yeah, Gail is also going to send it out to anyone who she has the email address from you.
Yeah.
But.
And Phyllis had an excellent suggestion about maybe we could, in our follow-up session, we could talk about what do we do when we notice microaggressions within the parties of the sessions, whether it's a mediation or a facilitation peacemaking circle. So anything else before we say thank you to Layla and Sue?